So, would you like something blending French flair and Swiss seriousness? Do you want something that could have come from a fighter cockpit or could have come from the dash of a 1920s luxury car? Are you comfortable spending up to, say, $4,000 US and aren't going to die in a ditch over getting an in-house movement for that? Want a GMT function in and amongst all of that? If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then it's quite possible that the Bell & Ross BR03 GMT is a watch that you should have a better look at. After the intro, let's have a closer look at that watch. Okay, so let's start by having a quick description of this watch so we all know what we're with. Now, there have been a couple of versions of this watch, so it's really important, I think, you get the reference number. So this is reference BR03-93-GMT-STSCA. As terms of genre, it's a pilot's watch, a GMT watch, a travel watch. It's a couple of different things. It's going to cost you around about $4,000 if you're paying full retail. You probably won't have to, more likely to be in the high twos, low $3,000. Now, this watch was introduced in 2016. Now, I believe it remains current. However, my local AD has said that it may have been withdrawn. So I'm unsure if it's actually still a current watch or has been withdrawn. If you're interested, go check out from your AD and maybe he can tell you. In trying to understand this watch, I think we have to realize that Bell & Ross is aviation to their core. Lots of flying, especially military and specifically French military flying in their DNA. But there's a fair dash of French design flair and what I call industrial luxe in their brand. This watch is inside their instrument collection, and that word instrument is key. This is intended to evoke, even if it's not, doesn't look exactly like an aircraft instrument. It's supposed to be legible, rugged, and accurate, but also it's supposed to be very French, very design-led and beautiful. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so one look at this watch and you can see it's clearly been taken from a cockpit panel until you actually put it next to a watch, another actual cockpit instrument, and clearly it hasn't been. But in a way it doesn't matter. As I said earlier, it's not supposed to look exactly like an instrument, rather it's supposed to evoke the idea of an aircraft instrument, which I think is what it does. And it is, as well as that, absolutely gorgeous. The case is something really special. There's no one else really doing a case like this at anywhere near this price point. It's complex, wonderfully finished, perfectly in tune with what it's trying to achieve. I absolutely love the case back on this. As a military aviation engineer, this just looks so much like a picking slip you get with an aircraft part. Another thing I've got to say about this watch, it seems obvious and it wouldn't appear to be difficult, but so many people get the integration of a circular dial into a square watch case horribly wrong. That I really should say here, Bell & Ross have nailed it. Their integration of that circle into the square is absolutely perfect. The distances from the circle to the square edges, just nailed it. If we go back to the dial, clearly the Arabics dominate, sitting somewhere between serious aviation and a little bit more fun design-led. Personally, I think those Arabics are really the most French part of the design. It comes with a fixed bezel, which is a really interesting compromise of form versus function. I think it looks better if you compare it to the more recent version with the movable bezel. I think the fixed bezel looks better. Yes, you lose the ability to track a third time zone and perhaps have a sort of a really cheap timer function. But yeah, each of us is going to have to make a decision about where our priorities lie. I personally agree with the decision to go for the looks here and keep the... You'd be forgiven for not seeing the date on this watch. This is probably the most careful, discreet, and thoughtfully integrated date display I've ever seen. That's as long as for you just tolerate dates and you just want that date to be as unobtrusive as possible. If on the other hand you love a date, you need a date, you want that date to be big and in your face, then perhaps this implementation isn't for you. One thing I really have to stress is that the whole watch head, the dial and the case, the bezel, everything stands up really well under macro. This is a watch whose execution matches its design. I should note, I've had this watch now for a couple of years. It gets a fair bit of banging around, so any damage you see on this watch is mine, not coming from the factory. When we get down to the band, mine came with two. It comes with a matte looking black leather and a heavily vented, really supple rubber. They're great bands. I wouldn't want to swap them out, which is just as well at 24 millimeters across, and also with this kind of semi-integrated design. I suspect it would be really hard to replace. But as I said, I don't think you really need to. The bands it comes with are killer. One thing I should say is this watch comes with bugger all lume. There's this compromise that we keep coming back to between real instrument and flair and design. In this case, the decision about where the lume would be, they've clearly gone for the looks and the design over ultimate lume usefulness. Again, you will have to make your decision on whether you thought that was a good call or not. Talking about the specs, it's pretty much what you'd expect, or maybe not. Okay, obviously made from 316L steel, obviously got a sapphire crystal. Not so obviously, but very welcome, has a 100-meter water resistance, no screw-down crown. So if you are the insecure type and would like the security of a screw-down crown, yeah, this watch is not quite going to give you that. Okay, so the movement here is the Bell & Ross Caliber 303, which ultimately is an ETA 2893-2. Many of you are going to gag on that. You're going to be thinking that that's not enough movement for a watch of this price point. That's a great movement. It's thin, it's reliable, it is super robust. There's nothing wrong with it. You might not think that's enough. Again, that's kind of your call to make. Talking about wearability, this is 52 millimeters lug to lug with an awful lot of steel between it. This watch is going to be for the larger wrist. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. There is incredible articulation of the band around those lugs, so you might buy back a little bit of wearability, but at the end of the day, that 52 millimeters is not getting any smaller. This is going to be for the bigger wrist. In terms of feel on the wrist, that is entirely dependent on how you wear this watch. If, like me, you routinely like to wear your watch a bit lower, so below the wrist bone, the shape of this watch is not going to help you. It is going to jam up against your hand. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be a great watch if that's how you wear it. On the other hand, if you slide it up just a little bit over that wrist bone, then suddenly this big, flat, only 11 millimeter thick watch almost vanishes. It becomes so comfortable, so planted, so secure. Yeah, I've never worn a watch which is so different on whether you wear it low or high. Finally, let's talk about presence. At 42 millimeters, not a massive watch, but then square watches have this odd effect of appearing much bigger than normal. And this watch, it looks huge. For better or worse, this is a watch that will not be missed and will not be misidentified on your wrist. As I always say, you cannot separate art from the artist. You cannot separate a watch from the brand. If you're going to try and assess a watch, you really need to understand where the brand kind of fits and how it's going to be seen. After a moment in the sun a few years ago, Bell & Ross has kind of dropped off the fan favorite list of watch enthusiasts. They tend to place most of their emphasis on the design and execution, less emphasis on the specs and in particular the movements of their watches. That is a toxic combination to a lot of watch enthusiasts and especially social media folk, a lot of watch enthusiasts, a lot of watch commentators are kind of suspicious of aesthetics. They prefer to focus on specs and movement. And in that kind of top trumps battle, Bell & Ross doesn't come out well. On the other hand, if design is more your happy place, if you're more comfortable considering just how good a watch looks, just what it's trying to say in terms of its aesthetics, then Bell & Ross generally, and this watch in particular, is a brand for you. Okay, so let's get to the end and sum all this up in a kind of a judgment call. How well did Bell & Ross do in meeting their requirements for this watch? Quick reminder, what are they trying to do? They're trying to do two completely different things at the same time. They're trying to create a visually intriguing aircraft instrument for professionals that want a luxury item. It's intended to have impeccable build and a lot of unique design functions, but not cost the earth. That's going to mean that there are compromises and conflicts. Each of us are going to have to decide how you feel about those conflicts and compromises. In this case, they have prioritized design and execution over the performance, so over the movement and what's inside. Personally, I think they got it right. I think that is the right balance to make for what they are trying to achieve here. The watch feels like an instrument, and even though when you delve into it, there are gaps, I don't think it matters because ultimately, remember, these watches are jewelry. That every mechanical watch is only ever really pretending to be a professional tool. In truth, these watches are always luxury items, and Bell & Ross really deliver on the luxury. They have decided that that's what they're going to prioritize. The amount and quality of the design, the care in the execution is absolutely amazing and totally justifies its price. Now, I understand that last sentence is going to be really controversial to a lot of you. This watch is not a spec monster. Many of people are going to balk at the idea of paying over $3,000 for a watch with an ETA movement powering it. If that's the case, then Bell & Ross probably isn't the brand for you. Their balance of priorities of design and execution over specs/performance might not match yours. But if you value design, and by value I mean are willing to pay for it, and you want that design executed extremely well, the Bell & Ross BR03 GMT will give you a whole lot of watch and is worth you having a serious look at.